I used to rent my basement until I found they weren't humans. Creepypasta. It's strange how quickly a life can unravel. A year ago I was married, living in a downtown apartment with a city view and all the background noise that made me feel less alone. Now I'm 36, divorced, and trying to rebuild from the bottom up in a quiet, dead-end suburban town that practically rolls its sidewalks up at night. I moved here a few months ago, thinking a change of scenery might help. I was wrong. But at the time, it felt like the logical next step, away from shared memories and toward something new, even if that new meant lonely silences and creaking floorboards. The house I found was cheap, suspiciously so, but I didn't have many options. It was a 2-story fixer-upper, slightly leaning to one side, the kind of house that has personality but not in a good way. The paint on the shutters was peeling, and the wood siding had faded into a dull gray. Still, it had potential, or so I told myself during the final walkthrough with the real estate agent, who seemed a little too eager to make the sale. She glossed over the basement like it was an afterthought, even though it was fully finished and had its own side entrance. That should have been a red flag. Money was tight. The divorce had cleaned out most of my savings, and between the legal fees and trying to stay afloat on a single income, I knew I needed help covering the mortgage. That's when the idea hit me. I'd rent out the basement. It had a separate door on the side of the house, a small kitchenette and a bathroom. It wasn't glamorous, but it was livable. Maybe perfect for a student or someone between jobs. I figured I'd screen applicants carefully, maybe meet them in a public place first, draw up a proper lease. Keep things professional. The first night in the house I didn't sleep well. The place had an unfamiliar rhythm. Every wood panel and pipe seemed to groan or click. Around midnight the temperature dropped hard, like someone had left a window open. But I checked. Everything was shut. I wrapped myself in an old quilt and told myself it was just the insulation or lack thereof. The next morning I made coffee and sat at my laptop, staring at the screen for a long time before typing the listing. I described the space as cozy and private, threw in buzzwords like affordable, separate entrance, and ideal for quiet tenants. I even included a few friendly photos: sunlight pouring in through the tiny basement window, a staged futon with a throw pillow. I hit publish. Within hours the emails started trickling in. Most were spam or just strange. A couple seemed promising. I reminded myself to be cautious. You never know what kind of people are out there. But then again I thought people probably say the same thing about me. They replied to the ad just after midnight, which was odd. Most people send inquiries during the day or evening hours, but this one popped into my inbox when the world was asleep. It was a short message, polite but formal, almost like it had been copied from a template. Hello, we are interested in the basement space. Please let us know if it is still available. We are quiet, clean, and can move in quickly. Thank you. It was signed simply Mara and Lyle. I responded the next morning, a little wary but intrigued. We set up a meeting for that evening, and they arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I remember watching from my living room window as they walked up the driveway. There was something strange about them right away, something subtle. They moved with perfect synchronicity, not holding hands, but walking as though tethered by invisible strings. Both of them wore long, heavy clothing despite the warm summer evening, coats that went past their knees, sleeves that swallowed their hands. Their skin looked pale, almost gray under the porch light, and when they looked at me neither of them blinked. Not once. Still they were courteous. Lyle introduced himself first. His voice was low, soft, and had a slight accent I couldn't quite place. Eastern European, maybe? Scandinavian? It had a strange cadence, almost melodic but somehow offbeat, like someone who had memorized the rhythm of human speech without understanding it. Mara was quieter. She smiled faintly, almost nervously, and nodded as Lyle spoke for both of them. I gave them a quick tour. The basement wasn't much. An open living space, a bathroom, a narrow kitchenette with a small fridge and hot plate. They didn't ask many questions, didn't seem concerned with amenities or details. They just nodded at everything, eyes wide and unblinking, as if they were memorizing the layout. We like it, Lyle said. It is quiet. This is good. They moved in that same night. No moving van, no car. Just 2 large, beat-up duffel bags that they carried over their shoulders. I offered to help, but they declined. We travel light, Mara said. Her voice was raspy, breathy, like the sound of leaves scraping pavement. It sent a chill down my spine, though I couldn't say why. I asked if they needed anything, offered extra towels, kitchen utensils, the usual. Again they declined. We have everything we need, Lyle said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope filled with cash. The exact amount, not a dollar short. He handed it to me with both hands, almost ceremoniously, like a transaction in some old ritual. I counted it after they went downstairs. The bills were crisp and new, but they smelled strange. Not like money usually does. More like metal. Or salt. The first few nights were uneventful. I barely heard them. No footsteps, no television, no talking. They seemed to vanish once the door shut behind them. Then one morning I found a small note slipped under my front door. The handwriting was neat, all capital letters. Please do not enter basement without notice. No loud music or noise between dusk and dawn. We prefer privacy. We will respect your space as well. I didn't have a problem with any of that. In fact, I appreciated the courtesy. Most tenants don't go out of their way to be so considerate. Still, something about the phrasing felt clinical, almost rehearsed, like it had been written many times before. They kept to themselves exactly as they said. No packages arrived for them. No guests. I never saw them during the day, and the only evidence of their presence was the occasional faint creak of floorboards below my feet. They paid the rent early in cash every time. Always the exact amount. Always handed to me in the same thick envelope. After the first week, I began to forget they were even down there. But every so often, I'd glance at the basement door, expecting to hear footsteps or muffled voices, and hear nothing at all. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. That's when I realized I didn't know a single thing about them. It started gradually, like a sickness creeping in so slowly you don't notice until it's too late. The first thing I noticed were the noises. It was always after midnight, never earlier, never later. I'd be lying in bed, half awake, staring at the ceiling when I'd hear it. A faint, wet dragging sound. Not sharp or mechanical, but organic, like something heavy and soft being pulled across a linoleum floor. It was followed by a series of low rhythmic clicks. At first, I told myself it was plumbing. Old houses make weird sounds. But this wasn't coming from the walls or the pipes. It was coming from the basement directly beneath my room. I tried to ignore it. Told myself it was the fridge kicking on or some mechanical thing I didn't understand. But the sounds didn't stop. Some nights they grew louder, more distinct, like something dragging itself in slow, irregular circles. The clicking would rise and fall in speed and pitch, almost like an insect's chatter but deeper, more deliberate. It wasn't random. It had a pattern. I started recording the audio with my phone, but each time I played it back, there was only silence or static. Then came the smell. It seeped through the vents, faint at first. I'd be making coffee or brushing my teeth and I'd catch a whiff of something sharp and chemical, like industrial cleaner but mixed with something worse. Something organic. A sour, metallic scent that made the back of my throat tighten. Like blood that had been left out too long. Then it got stronger, thicker. I could taste it in the air some mornings. I tried everything. Changed the filters, aired out the house, even bought a bunch of those plug-in air fresheners. Nothing helped. The smell always came back. Always strongest after dark. I considered going down to ask them about it, but I hesitated. They'd been quiet tenants, paid on time, never made trouble. And frankly, something about the basement made me uneasy. Like it didn't want me there. One night, I ran into my neighbor Julie while taking the trash out. We made small talk about weather and garbage schedules, and then her cat, a fat, lazy orange tabby named Scooter, trotted out from behind the hedge. He wandered toward my house like he often did, but as he reached the edge of the lawn near the basement door, he stopped. His back arched, fur puffed up like a bristle brush. He hissed, a deep, guttural sound I'd never heard him make. Then he bolted back to Julie like something had chased him. She laughed nervously. "He's usually not like that," she said. "He loves people." Weird. I smiled, pretending it didn't bother me, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Even a stupid animal could sense something was wrong. Something that I kept trying to explain away with logic. Then the light started acting up. Only in the basement. The overhead bulb in the stairwell would flicker when I passed, but only when I got close to the door. I replaced it. Same thing. I replaced the entire fixture. Still flickered. The power company said there were no reported issues. An electrician came by, looked at the panel and said everything was normal. But sometimes when I walked past late at night, I'd see the light under the basement door blink rapidly like a strobe, casting fast shadows against the cracks. Then it would stop, sudden and absolute, like someone had yanked the cord. The worst part came about 2 weeks after they moved in. I saw Lyle outside. It was around 3 a.m. I'd had a nightmare, something I couldn't quite remember, and got up to grab water. As I passed the window, I saw him standing in the side yard, not moving. Just standing. The porch light cast a yellow circle around him, and I could see his face turn toward the sky, mouth slightly open. His arms dangled by his sides, too long, too still. Then he moved. It wasn't a normal movement. He didn't turn or shift like a person does. Instead, his body seemed to fold at the middle like his spine was made of soft rubber. He bent in a slow, unnatural arc backward until his head was almost parallel to his lower back, then twisted slightly, like a praying mantis adjusting its posture. I froze. I didn't even breathe. He stayed that way for nearly a full minute. Then he straightened up with the same sickening grace and walked calmly back toward the basement door. Not fast, not sneaky. Just smooth and quiet, like nothing had happened. I backed away from the window, my skin crawling, heart racing. I didn't sleep that night. I left every light in the house on and sat in the living room with a baseball bat in my lap, feeling ridiculous and terrified in equal measure. I didn't confront him. I didn't even mention it the next morning when I heard the faint creak of the basement door. What would I say? Hey, I saw you do a spider leg backbend in the yard last night. Everything okay? No. I stayed quiet. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a half-sleep hallucination. But deep down I knew better. Something wasn't right. They weren't right. It was a Tuesday morning when the mailman said something that stuck with me. He was a new guy, friendly, talkative, a little too eager to chat. I was outside trimming some overgrown hedges near the front steps when he approached, mail in hand, and said, "Hey, got a question for you. How many people you got living downstairs?" I looked up from the clippers. "Just two. A couple." "Why?" He shrugged and gave a half smile. "Huh. I could have sworn I saw a bunch of different people going in and out over the past week. Early mornings, late nights. All wearing the same kind of long coats, though. Figured maybe you were running a little hostel or something." I forced a laugh. "No, just the couple. Quiet types." He nodded, unconvinced, and handed over my mail. I watched him walk down the street, my pulse suddenly pounding in my ears. I wanted to believe he was mistaken. Maybe he'd seen people from the neighboring house. Maybe he'd misjudged the timing. But deep down I knew something was off. Lyle and Mara didn't seem like the type to have friends, or at least not human ones. That night as I lay in bed I heard the whispers. They didn't sound like a conversation. It was more like chanting, soft and rhythmic, pulsing just beneath the floorboards. I pressed my ear to the wood, and the words vibrated against my skull. The language was unfamiliar. Not just foreign but unnatural, like clicking syllables and throat-scraping consonants that no human mouth should be able to produce. I couldn't make out any meaning, but the cadence stuck in my head like a bad song. I sat up, heart hammering, debating whether to go down and demand an explanation. But the memory of Lyle folding in half in the moonlight held me back. I told myself I'd wait until morning. If it happened again, I'd confront them. It did happen again. And again. Every night around the same time. Always underneath me, always distant, but never quite gone. And then there were the blackouts. The first one happened on a Friday night. The entire house went dark just after 2 a.m. No storm, no warning. My phone flickered too. Battery drained from 70% to 0 instantly. I thought it was a fluke. Called the power company the next day, but they said there hadn't been any outages in the area. Exactly 3 nights later, it happened again. Same time, same sudden void. I noticed something else that time. The power would come back after precisely 13 minutes. I timed it. That happened again 3 nights after that. 13 minutes of absolute, suffocating darkness. No outside lights. No moon. Just black. It was like something was feeding and the house was its plug. On the 4th blackout, I crept toward the basement door with a flashlight. The beam flickered, threatened to die. But I caught something, just for a second, glimmering on the first step. A slick, black trail, thick and viscous like oil mixed with blood. It had a sheen to it like it was still wet. I knelt down, heart jackhammering, and touched the edge of it with the tip of a pen. It hissed. No joke, hissed. Like steam hitting a hot stove. I jumped back, dropped the pen. The smell that rose up from it was putrid. Rotting meat and copper. Like the inside of something long dead. I didn't clean it. I just shut the door and sat on the floor until the lights came back. When I checked again the next morning, it was gone. No stain, no trace, nothing. Even the pen was missing. That's when I decided I needed to talk to them. Face to face. I waited until I heard movement downstairs. Soft footsteps and the clink of something metallic. I walked to the basement door, knocked once, then again louder. No answer. I called out, tried to keep my voice steady. "Lyle? Mara? Can we talk?" Silence. I knocked again. Nothing. Finally I turned the knob. Locked. I grabbed the spare key I kept for emergencies and slid it in. The key didn't fit. It had worked the week before when I'd gone down to fix a leaky pipe. But now it was like the lock had been changed, or worse, wasn't even a lock anymore. The key rattled, twisted wrong, wouldn't turn. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Not even the whispers. And then, they disappeared. I didn't hear a single sound for 2 full days. No movement, no lights, no creaking floorboards. The air coming up from under the door felt cold and sterile. I left food near the door once just to see. Came back the next morning and it was gone, but I hadn't heard it move. On the second night, I stood outside their basement entrance, the one that led out into the yard, and waited. I thought maybe they'd come home late. Maybe I'd catch them in the act of whatever they were doing. But the door never opened. The curtains over the tiny basement window didn't shift. It was like they'd vanished into the walls. And the worst part was, I found myself relieved. Because whatever they were doing down there, I wasn't sure I wanted to see it. I don't know what made me go down there that day. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was the silence that had stretched out too long, 2 full days without a sound from below. Whatever it was, I found myself standing at the top of the basement stairs again, staring down into that dim, stale hallway, hand hovering over the light switch like I was waiting for something to stop me. Nothing did. The smell was still there, faint but clinging, something chemical, something decayed. I stepped down cautiously, flashlight in hand even though the overhead bulb still worked. The basement looked the same as always, too clean. The furniture was barely disturbed, the tiny table untouched, the blankets on the futon smoothed out with unnatural precision. But something was off. I felt it in the air, in my gut, like the space had been rearranged somehow. Then I noticed the corner wall near the back, where the water heater sat humming quietly. There was a faint line along the drywall, barely visible but wrong. A seam that shouldn't have been there. Curiosity pushed me forward. I tapped the wall, then ran my hand along it. One of the panels shifted under my fingers. Just slightly, maybe half an inch inward. I hesitated. Then I pressed harder and the panel creaked. Not loudly, just enough to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. With a little effort, I pried the panel loose. It came free with a dry, papery snap. Behind it was a narrow, pitch-black crawl space. I crouched and shined the flashlight inside. The beam trembled slightly from my hand. The space was about 5 feet deep and maybe 4 feet tall. It had a dirt floor, no insulation, no finish work. Just soil and dust. The smell grew stronger instantly and my stomach turned. What I saw inside didn't make sense. The walls were covered in markings, some carved into the wood, others drawn in dark ink that bled into the grain. They weren't letters I recognized. They weren't anything really. Jagged symbols. Loops and slashes arranged in spirals and lines, almost like equations or spells. There were symbols that looked like open eyes. Others resembled screaming mouths. And then there were the bones. Scattered along the dirt floor were dozens of tiny bones, some no bigger than my thumb. Others longer and curved like parts of a small spine or a claw. They were arranged in spirals woven into the symbols. Some had thread tied around them as if they'd been part of something ceremonial. Near the back of the crawl space were several large plastic containers, like the kind used for industrial chemicals. They were empty, but the inside walls were stained yellow and smelled overwhelmingly of formaldehyde. One of the containers had a clump of dark hair stuck to its rim. I backed away quickly, heart pounding. I didn't touch anything else. I didn't want to. Instead, I pulled out my phone, snapped half a dozen photos and got out. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, my phone was frozen. The screen flickered, then turned black. I tried restarting it, but it wouldn't respond. Finally, I plugged it in upstairs and got it to power back on. When I opened the gallery, every photo I'd taken was corrupted. Blurred lines, distorted colors, like static over an old TV. Some had strange dark spots in the corners like something watching through the frame. I deleted them all. But I didn't go back into that space. Not that day. Not ever. Some things don't want to be found. It happened on the 11th night of silence. By then, I had convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, they were gone. That they'd slipped out the side door during one of those blackouts and vanished into the world, leaving behind their strange smells and symbols and darkness like a nightmare I could finally wake from. I kept telling myself it was over. That the quiet was a good thing. But the truth was, it felt worse. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was thick, oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. That night I stayed up late. I couldn't sleep. I paced from room to room, checking locks, windows, lights. Everything was in place. I made tea. Tried to read. Even turned on the TV for background noise, but nothing helped. My nerves were fraying and I didn't know why. Then just after 2 a.m. it started. The first sound wasn't a thud or a bang. It was a screech. Not mechanical. Not human. It was high-pitched and sharp, like metal being torn apart, but layered with something wet. Something biological. It came from directly beneath me, right below the living room floor. I froze. The mug in my hand trembled and spilled hot tea down my wrist. I didn't feel it. Then came the crashing, violent, chaotic. It sounded like every piece of furniture in the basement was being hurled against the walls. Wood splintering. Glass breaking. Something heavy slammed into the staircase and I heard footsteps, or claws, scraping up the steps. And then, silence. I stood there in the middle of my living room, heart in my throat, unsure if I should move, scream, or pray. My eyes drifted to the basement door. It creaked open, slowly. No wind. No draft. Just a low, aching creak like the house was trying to warn me. A thin slice of pitch black stared back at me through the gap in the doorway. I don't remember walking toward it, but I must have. The next thing I knew, I was standing at the top of the basement steps, flashlight in hand, listening to my own heartbeat. I clicked it on. The beam jittered like it didn't want to go where I pointed it. Dust floated in the stale air and the temperature dropped fast. My breath came out in visible puffs. I took the first step down. Then the next. Halfway down I saw her. Mara. But she wasn't Mara anymore. She stood motionless at the bottom of the stairs, bathed in weak flashlight glow. Her body was grotesquely changed, stretched thin, impossibly tall. Her limbs hung like wires, elongated and twitching at the joints. Her skin was translucent, barely hiding the black veinwork beneath. No eyes, just empty sockets sunken deep into her elongated skull. And her mouth had changed into something that should not exist. It ran from cheek to cheek, stretched wide in a gash that split open like a jagged wound, filled with long needle-like teeth that vibrated with each breath. Her lips, or what was left of them, twitched constantly like they were trying to remember how to smile. She didn't move. But something did. I heard the sound before I saw him, scratching from above, like nails dragging along drywall. Then Lyle crawled into view. Not walked. Crawled. He moved along the ceiling like an insect, his limbs bent the wrong way, head twisted unnaturally sideways. His body hugged the surface like he was weightless, and every movement made a sickening, popping sound as if his bones were rearranging themselves with each shift. He turned his face toward me, only it wasn't a face anymore. Just a smooth surface, featureless except for the faint impression of a mouth that began to open. Not downward, but vertically, splitting the front of his head into two jagged halves. Then came the voice. Not out loud. In my head. It wasn't Mara. It wasn't Lyle. It was both. It was many. You let us in, they whispered. You opened the house. You fed us silence. I stumbled back up the stairs, nearly dropping the flashlight. My legs felt numb. My chest tightened with panic. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The fear had robbed me of every sound. They didn't follow. They just stood there, one on the floor, one on the ceiling, watching me. Or sensing me. I don't know how long I stared, frozen in place. But I remember blinking, and in that fraction of a second the door slammed shut. I bolted it. Threw the deadbolt, shoved a chair under the knob, and backed away like it would explode open any second. Then I called the police. My hands shook so badly I could barely dial. When the dispatcher answered, I couldn't even form coherent sentences at first. I told them I had dangerous intruders. I told them something wasn't right, that my tenants had gone insane, mutated, attacked me. They told me to stay on the line and wait for officers. When they arrived, I expected screams, gunshots, anything. But they didn't react that way. They searched the entire basement. Found it trashed, furniture broken, walls scratched. But no people. No Mara. No Lyle. And none of what I saw. No bones. No symbols. No secret room. Even the drywall I had pulled down was perfectly intact, like it had never been touched. They asked if I was under the influence of anything. Told me maybe I'd imagined it. Suggested stress. Maybe a break-in. Maybe rats. They didn't see what I saw. But I did. And I know they're still down there. Waiting. I couldn't just let it go. Even after the police left, even after the reports were filed and the officers gave me that careful look, the kind that sits on the edge of pity and suspicion, I knew I hadn't imagined it. You don't hallucinate those kinds of details. You don't fabricate teeth that vibrate, or limbs that fold like puppet strings. And you definitely don't imagine whispers that sink into your skull like wet cloth and stay there. So I did what any paranoid, sleepless person with an internet connection does. I started digging. At first, it was just late-night Google searches, strange tenants, weird basement encounters, inhuman renters, All the usual rabbit holes that spit back creepypasta stories and ghost hunting YouTubers. Nothing serious. Nothing helpful. But then I got more specific. I searched combinations of phrases I remembered from the symbols I had seen. The eye-shaped carvings, the spiraling bones, the scent of formaldehyde. I used image recognition tools, started poking into dark corners of the web, places I had no business being. That's when I stumbled onto the post. It was buried in an old subreddit that hadn't been active in years, something like r/threshold watchers or r/below the floor, I can't remember exactly. The original post was written almost a decade ago by a user named I Am Not Home. It was titled, "If they ask to rent your basement, say no. They're not looking for shelter. They're looking for soil." I read it 3 times, each time more slowly. The post was long, rambling in some places, lucid in others. The author claimed they had rented out a finished basement in their house in upstate New York to a quiet couple, who matched my tenants almost exactly: polite, pale, strange accents, paid in cash, no personal items. He wrote about the smell, the clicking, the sounds in the walls. He mentioned how they never came up during the day, how they always asked for privacy. But the most disturbing part was near the end. "They don't live in the basement," the author wrote. "They use it to dig. Every time. Always beneath the house. I think they're looking for something, or worse, trying to open something. I found a hole once. It wasn't a tunnel. It was vertical, like a shaft. And it wasn't dirt at the bottom. It was moving, breathing. That part stuck with me. A shaft. Something breathing." I immediately messaged the user, not expecting a reply. The account had been inactive for years. But I left a desperate, rambling message anyway, detailing everything I'd seen, every smell, every whisper, every flickering light. He replied less than an hour later. "They're not aliens. Not demons. Just not from here." That was the first line. We messaged back and forth over the course of the next 2 days. I asked where they came from. He didn't answer directly. Just said they weren't from anywhere we can see. That they needed space, vertical space. Places where the veil between here and not here was thin. That's why they always chose basements. They needed quiet, stillness, isolation. "They open gates," he wrote. "Tiny ones. Doesn't take much. Just a few feet of soil, time, and silence." He sent me screenshots of other posts, deleted threads, strange real estate records. Houses across the country, always in small towns, suddenly sold, then abandoned. Missing persons reports. Power outages. Weird break-ins where nothing was stolen, only furniture rearranged. Always involving basements. Always a couple or something posing as a couple. And the worst part? They don't always leave when they're done, he said. Sometimes they stay behind. In pieces. That was the last message he sent me. The account went dark after that. Deleted. But the phrase stuck with me like a splinter under my skin. They're not looking for shelter. They're looking for soil. I couldn't take it anymore. The silence. The whispering. The sense that something was still breathing beneath the floorboards, even though Mara and Lyle were gone, or had become something else entirely. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. Every time the house creaked, I jumped. Every time the power flickered, my skin prickled like it was being touched from inside out. So I made a decision. A final one. I was going to burn it. Not the whole house, just the basement. I didn't care about the legal trouble or what the fire department might say. The house had insurance. It would be written off as faulty wiring. But more importantly, whatever was down there, whatever had been opened, I needed to close it, or bury it, or erase it the only way I could. I waited until nightfall. Somehow it felt appropriate. I gathered a can of gasoline from the shed, soaked an old blanket with it, and laid it across the bottom few steps. My hands were trembling. I had a box of matches in my pocket, my fingers clenched around it like a lifeline. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring into the blackness. The basement door was wide open again. It had done that before. Always when something was waiting. I was just about to strike the first match when I heard her voice. "Mara." I spun around and she was there. Standing at the top of the basement stairs. Human again, or trying to be. Same clothes. Same long coat. Same pale skin. But something was off. Her eyes were too still, too wide. Her face looked stretched, like a mask pulled too tight over something underneath. She didn't blink. "We only needed a little more time," she said softly. "You weren't supposed to see. You weren't supposed to interrupt." "What the hell are you?" I whispered. Her lips trembled. She looked sad. "Now they're awake." And then it started. The house shuddered beneath me, not like a normal vibration but a pulse. A deep, thunderous thump from under the floor, like the heartbeat of something ancient and buried. The air in the basement thickened. The temperature dropped. And the floor cracked. Not in one place, everywhere. Thin spiderweb fractures raced across the basement tiles, splitting them open like eggshells. Something black began to ooze up through the cracks. Not liquid. Not solid. Like ink and smoke and muscle all at once. Tendrils. They stretched, curled, and reached for me with horrible speed. One grazed my ankle. It was wet and freezing and made my skin scream. I turned and ran. Mara didn't follow. She just stared, her mouth open wide in an impossible oval, eyes streaming with black tears. I made it out of the house, barely. Tripped over the porch steps. Looked back once, and I saw it. Something massive slithering just beneath the foundation. No face. No shape. Just movement and hunger. Then the basement door slammed shut behind me, and the house went still. They condemned the house a week later. The fire marshal never even questioned the gas stains or half-burned matches. They just shook their heads, muttered something about unstable ground, poor structure, compromised foundation. The official report blamed a sudden sinkhole beneath the property. Too dangerous to salvage. The house was fenced off, taped up, forgotten. No one went near the basement. I didn't bother fighting it. I had nothing left there, nothing I wanted back. I lived in my car for a while after that. Still do. I park in different places each night, never the same lot twice. I keep the engine running in case I need to leave fast. And I sleep with the driver's seat leaned back and a hammer under my pillow. Paranoia doesn't begin to describe it. I see them. Not every day. Not even every week. But often enough to know it's not coincidence. Pale figures. Long coats. Always too still. Always too quiet. They stand in crowds. Bus stations. Grocery store lines. Outside gas stations at night. Never close, just visible. Watching. Waiting. They all wear gloves. I've passed one on a sidewalk. Glanced at his face and he smiled. Not with his mouth, with his eyes. They didn't blink. Sometimes they disappear when I turn around. Other times they don't. I don't trust basements anymore. Not apartments. Not shops. Not even stairs leading downward in public buildings. My body reacts before my brain does. Heart pounding, feet locking in place. I feel it in my chest. That same weight. That same pressure. Like the ground beneath me is breathing. I looked up one of the old houses I read about on the forum, the one in upstate New York. Gone now. Nothing but overgrown weeds and a cracked driveway. No one remembers the owners. I don't tell people the full story anymore. I tried once to a woman I met at a diner. She seemed kind. I told her bits and pieces, expecting laughter or pity. But when I mentioned the black ooze, she went quiet. Then she asked, "Did it smell like copper?" I left immediately. The whispers haven't stopped. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I hear them under the car. The same low clicking. Like teeth on tile. Sometimes it's laughter. Sometimes it's that phrase again and again. "You let us in." I don't sleep much anymore. And I've learned that you don't need to open a door for them. You just need to look at one too long. Stand near it. Wonder what's behind it. Sometimes even curiosity is enough. So if you're reading this and you've got a room in your house you never go into, a door that leads somewhere you don't like to think about, don't open it. Don't even listen too long. And if you ever hear clicking beneath your floor at night,